So, Jason and Vicky, welcome to Turf Tuesday.
Well, thank you,
Thank
Jim.
you, Jim.
It's
Yeah,
nice to be here.
yeah. I mean, we're I think the irony is we're hundreds of miles away geographically, but might have had the same weather this summer.
Brutal,
Yeah,
man. Absolutely brutal.
it's been hot up here for sure.
Yeah,
So,
I mean, we're used to it with our Bermuda grasses and zoysia grasses. I was at TPC Southwind actually yesterday. They're getting ready to host the St. Jude and tip of the cap to that crew out there. They did a full greens renovation and sprigged Tiff Eagle on May 3rd and are hosting a tour event now the first week of August. And certainly they had a pretty slow May coming out of the box, but really, really good June and July to grow some Bermuda grass with the heat and humidity that we've had this summer.
No,
Yeah.
absolutely. I walked by a neighbor's house the other day, and patch in their yard was glowing green, and the rest of their yard's predominantly fine fescue, and the fine fescue's screaming, like checking out, not irrigated. And I'm like, I got to figure out what this is. Walk up, and of course, it's zoysia grass, and it's just like perfect, perfect picture opportunity.
Yeah, living the dream.
Yeah.
Well, before we get into the topic of the pesticide ban that you all have been engaging with for the better part of a decade or more, for those who are with us today and might not know you, can you give a little bit of background on who you are and what you do at UConn and just kind of what brought you into your position there?
Vic, you want to go first?
sure. So I am Vicky Wallace, and I work. I'm in the Department of Extension here at UConn, and I have the umbrella of sustainable landscapes, in terms of responsibilities. And so I can some days put my Hort hat on, and some days the turf hat. At UConn, I do some evaluation of the NTEP trials and the ALIS trials up here. John Guajardo, another one of our colleagues, does the bentgrass and teps, but otherwise I have the other cool season ones up here as well. So I joined the Yukon faculty November of 2010. Prior to that, for years, been in seed sales, worked in the seed industry. So had some defined territory, as well as serving as an agronomist and going across country, whether it's to national meetings or regional areas, and giving presentations and whatnot, troubleshooting for the company. But 2010 came to UConn, and I'm in my 15th year here, and it's been quite interesting with the pesticide ban, I must say. So certainly a good focus of my effort in terms of lawn care and school grounds. Definitely revolves around aspects of the ban or misinformation about the ban and whatnot. So anyway, that's me in a nutshell, I guess. So
All right. I'm Jason Henderson. What am I in? What department? Plant science and landscape architecture. I'm teaching, research, and extension. So I got the lovely three-way appointment, but the predominant part of my appointment is teaching. So 50% teaching. So I teach introductory soil science course. I teach our advanced turfgrass management class, and I teach a gen ed course called the Great American Lawn, where we talk a lot about these issues and what turfgrass does for our society, not just socially, but environmentally, health-wise. So, one of my more fun courses to teach, simply because I get all kinds of majors in there, with a lot of great questions and a lot of great interest, and it creates a really nice format for that. And then I have research, which is 30% of my job. So when I came to UConn, I was primarily trained as a person in soil physical properties. So designing root zones for sports fields, putting greens, tees, any high quality landscapes. But my research quickly and my extension appointment, which is 20%, quickly morphed into finding alternatives for pesticide-free situations because of the legislation that's come down in our state, and that's where most of my research has focused, simply because of the pressure to find alternatives to maintain safe playing surfaces for our student athletes, and obviously, find tools for our turf managers. So
Yeah, and if you're listening, and you're in Tennessee, not to worry. There's not, I didn't select this topic to have Jason and Vicky on because there's a pesticide ban coming in our state. That's not what this is about. Um, where this idea evolved from, let's put it that way, was one of the things we have to do working in academia is we have to publish a bunch of papers about the work that we do and what it means in kind of a larger scientific context. And Jason and Vicky have been very active publishing papers about what they've learned working through this pesticide ban that's been in place in Connecticut for a decade. And I was reading those papers and thought there's a lot of good stuff here that not only highlight the response that they've had to that ban, maybe some of the negative impacts that the ban has had on overall turf quality and in some of the things that have evolved from it, right? Of ways to move forward because necessity is the mother of invention. So that's kind of how we got here. Vicky, do you want to maybe share a little background about the history of the band and kind of the nuts and bolts of what it is?
Sure. The legislation was originally proposed, I believe, in 1999, so well before the time that I came. But it then it was supposed to be enacted around 2005, and then there was some grace period. But again, they sort of hit the wall in July 1 of 2010, and that was when the law basically was enacted. And so it works for daycare, public and private schools up to grade 8. Also, if you are in a junior, senior high school, which is sort of the situation that I went through in New Jersey, if there was fields that were not separated for high school only, then the ban extended through the ban extends through that high school usage. Municipal fields are not involved at all with regard to this ban, even though good number of the school grounds managers that oversee school properties might also oversee municipal fields as well. But, essentially that's at the heart of the ban. And the ban also extends, when I say school grounds, it's all encompassing. So it's not just athletic fields. So it's all aspects of the ban. And I think that's also one of those aspects that people don't recognize or realize. So, periphery areas for these school grounds managers, in terms of the woodland edge, quite a distance from athletic fields also comes under this purview. Our ban does also reference that you can get an exemption. So, and I guess I'll backtrack a little bit. New York State is also, a neighboring state to Connecticut on one end, but they also have this ban in place. It went in, their ban started around the same time, their Child Playing Field Act. But theirs doesn't have the language that we have in ours, and ours is an exemption only if there's an immediate threat to human health. So that word immediate threat changes everything in terms of the way school grounds managers can apply for an exemption here. And so aspects of poison ivy close to the building, but if it was in the outer skirts of the property, that's where there's changes in terms of when they can or can't get an exemption from that standpoint. So all school grounds properties encompassing with this ban.
So who makes that judgment, right? About whether the poison ivy is close enough?
It would go through our Department of Environmental, Energy and Environmental Protection. And DEEP is, if you hear us reference DEEP, that's the acronym for that division within the state. So they would have to speak to the pesticide management, division of DEEP and to see if they would qualify, for lack of a better way to say it, for a ban.
And because it's everywhere, right? It's all the
Hmm.
grounds,
Hmm.
more than turf. So if you had a pest issue inside the school and you needed to use an insecticide or something like that to control it, that would be off the table?
No, it seems like interior is different. This is more external
Okay.
for the school grounds outside. And again, if they were treating, for example, a bee's nest that was attached or adhering to a wall of the school building, they can get treatment of that bee's nest much easier than, for example, like a ball-faced hornet's nest that's in a tree, the far edge of the property. Then they want you to cordon off the area with like yellow tape, and basically, kids supposedly can't go near there. That would be the treatment from that standpoint, but anything structural and internal like that they can use. However, if schools have courtyards, so we have some schools in the state here that have, really pretty courtyards, but then it goes right back to exterior treatment. And so those courtyards would be under the same ban that we would have. And the Board of Education is the one that would have to apply for, or is responsible in terms of, overseeing, restrictions, that would be in place.
So, walk me through a little, like, this happens in 2010,
Mm-hmm.
like, what happens next? I'm envisioning, a few years later, you have like a from The Last of Us situation where you got, shoulder high weeds growing everywhere and things are just unkempt really fast. Like where do we go from July 1, 2010 forward?
And maybe Jason can weigh in on some of this, but we've seen schools where it is absolutely positively, particularly elementary schools, totally unsafe for children to play. It's just a hard pan of soil. There's no turf whatsoever. Two fields that are either they've converted to synthetic or natural grass. I would say natural grass fields, if you have a good turf manager paying attention to fields, they can have some decent decent fields. You see that more like on high school varsity fields, particularly if they're prioritizing their fields in terms of budget and care. The elementary schools seem to take a back seat in terms of, care preferences, let's put it that way. And again, in some of the schools, each community is different. You could have somebody that's in charge of the school grounds at an elementary school field, and the guy could be, coming to the system because he's a certified plumber or an electrician and have zero outside plant care background. So that lends itself to some differences there. Or you have regional districts or parochial schools, they would fall under, instead of Board of Ed, public health, in within that town that might weigh in or apply for an exemption if there was an exemption from that standpoint. So I don't know. Jason was originally involved with some of the discussion and negotiation prior to the ban being enacted, so he could maybe speak to some of the things that were ongoing in terms of that discussion or whatnot. Or Jason, I don't know if there's anything else you want to weigh in,
Yeah, I mean, I
in
think the
terms of.
thing you gotta first of all understand about Vicky and I is we are not anti-pesticide. This is nothing we pushed. If anything, we fought against it. I want to make that very clear. I mean, we met with a lot of legislators during that time, trying to come up with some type of compromise or what the term I kept using constantly was more intelligent form of legislation because I just chose to use that term because I'd be sitting in these meetings with all these people, and obviously it's a very emotional driven topic, and trying to come up with ways, and when you talk to these legislators, when as soon as somebody puts, and again, I understand from a child safety standpoint there needs to be considerations, but they kept saying, well, I can't vote against this because if I do, I'm going to be slated as this person against childhood safety or children's
or
safety, and
or an anti-environment
or
person.
anti-environment. So, we pushed options of like, hey, let's, use the environmental impact quotient to select product and, least toxic, lowest amount of AI, apply it when kids aren't actively on campus or times when they're, away for a substantial period of time, whether it's breaks, summers, whatever. And all that got pretty much crushed. Even products like chlorantraniliprole, where it's like, look, this doesn't even have a signal word because the mammalian toxicity is so low. They're like, what? Hey, if we allow this, what else are we going to allow, and how are we going to make that decision? And go round and round and round. So again, we are not anti-pesticide. We push hard against this and try to come up with more intelligent forms of instituting it. But it ultimately came into effect. So, but to your point about what happened when this term came into effect, as you can imagine, the towns that had good budgets that were implementing good agronomic principles from the get-go, this transition was less dramatic. Those towns that were subcontracting out, uh, weed treatments or insect preventatives or insect curative applications, they're the ones that struggled most because um, they weren't able to make that transition from those implementations of subcontracting to like, hey, you've got to core cultivate more, or you've got to overseed more aggressively at these short, narrow windows of timing so we can take advantage of what Mother Nature's giving us, and establish desirable species under traffic. Traffic's going to help you actually get rid of weed pressure. So those towns that were, had good managers with the right resources had less impact, but those towns that didn't have the economic or people in charge to advocate for the right products and changes, whether it's, fertilization or overseeding, whatever, they're the ones that got hit the hardest.
Yeah. And you know what? And even 15 years later, you're still seeing that those grounds managers that really made an effort to understand the law, um, have made better decisions about their, you know, turf care or the landscape care, within the property. So a lot of it was just really trying to understand or interpret that. So there's still adjustment 15 years later as people retire and new people come in, what they can and can't do or perceptions, one way or another. So that's still ongoing. I guess
Well,
that's the best way to say that, yeah.
well, and I know like you both have published a bunch of work on this about, the evolutions in evolution, excuse me, in management that's been made. Can you talk a little bit, Vicky, about like some, you mentioned like the managers who've like leaned into the band early have made improvements. Like what are some of the improvements or changes that you've seen happen?
A lot more, we've stressed, over the years, like increasing their overseeding. Now, again, you got to think back to some of the years also, but right before this ban was enacted, we sort of had a downturn in the economy in 2009. And so that challenged some of the budgets in the early years when this was enacted. But there were some school systems that were able to increase some of their supply budget needs, whether it's increase the amount of fertilizer they might use, but definitely with overseeding. Nobody, I can't say that even though some turf guys might have tried, I don't say anybody got to like the numbers where like Minner would have talked about like 25
Sure.
pounds of seed, cool season. They try, but their budgets, even if there were increases, it was incremental increases over
Sure.
time. So there was, nothing dramatic. But if there were some municipal grounds managers that maybe left the golf industry and and had different practices, you might have seen some differences in terms of some of their turf care practices, taking it to the municipal level. And if for nothing else, what I mean there is record keeping. I mean, a
Okay.
good number of these municipal school grounds guys do not you know, and it's just because of like being a golf course superintendent, you know, you have to justify everything and write for your greens committee and write things down. So here, the idea of accurate record keeping is not, I wouldn't say it's well practiced, or it's in the minority. So anything that they can do to help enhance that. I mean, we've been talking about that since 2010. Um, you know, so that is one thing that still requires effort from that standpoint.
So on that record keeping front, we got a question here. Has there ever been an instance where the state has enforced a violation to a specific town?
Oh, definitely yes. So I would say, I think the state doesn't require an IPM plan, which I thought they did originally when I came here. But if they do have an IPM plan, then they really have to follow that. And if they don't, or if they write it very loosely, that's where actually some fines can come in through the state. So whether somebody makes a complaint to the state about a town or a school, you know, and then the state has to come in and evaluate it. For example, if they're not using appropriate products, they just say we use minimal risk products, let's say. No, they can get cited for that. They have to be specific in terms of what products maybe are within their arsenal of you know, products that they can use. So yes, um, they've had citations
Well,
I would say consistently in the last 15 years with
well, and it's
different
got to
towns.
be, to show a little, I guess, empathy for the turf manager. Like, if you put a ban in place where anything with an EPA registration number is now off the table, you're
Correct.
kind of into the world of like home remedy, like make your own concoctions, stuff you can find on the internet. Like, I mean, it just gets really, really less structured very quickly.
Right. So they can't do any homemade concoctions. But if they're not documented, you know, again, the product has to be registered like everywhere else, you know, registered within the state. They have to have a viable registration for some of the products. And I would say in the last 15 years, that's what I've really seen is some of these minimum risk products um, come and go. They're fly by nights. They might be here one year, then they're gone one year. Or the other thing that can happen with an EPA registered product is that percent active ingredient, everything's pretty standardized. And you get some of these minimum risk products like Burnout 2, not even Burnout 2, they changed their formula at some point. So again, the efficacy, you know, the success that they might see it changes all the time as well.
Well, and you talk a little bit. You mentioned it's got to be a registered product, but now we're
Mhm.
talking about things that are not EPA registered in the same way that fungicide and insecticide and herbicide are.
Correct.
Where is the registration with? Like, who's doing the registering, and what are the different classifications of products that are out there? I mean,
The registration goes to our Department of Energy and Environmental Protection.
so
They're the one.
it's a state level.
They have to register those products in the state, correct?
Wow. And are there instances where it's registered in Connecticut, but it's not registered in Massachusetts or in
I don't know about some of
Jersey?
the neighboring states. I don't know, Jason, if you've heard anything, but no, it just depends on what they've decided to register in Connecticut. And, you know, our state has a list, and the list just gets more and more cumbersome. And it can be everything from, you know, turf care products to, you know, anything else, you know, that a company might be registering, thinking that they could try to utilize for any, because the issue is too, the thought process originally was that, well, if they're going to organic products, that the organic products are safer. Again, not understanding, you know, the difference, you know, with some of that. So the perception was, oh, we could just use anything minimum risk and it's good to go.
Hmm.
So
And I don't know that they're doing any quote unquote, safety testing on.
no.
They're just, I don't know what type of criteria they're using to say, hey, this was registered or this is not. I have no idea. No idea.
Well, and I find myself wondering, if you're a turf manager in Connecticut, where would you go to know what was registered?
Right.
So they have, yeah, so they have to go to our deep website, and that's where the products would be listed. We have school IPM workshops every year, and we used to hand out that listing of products. And oh my gosh, it could be 25 pages now, because Deep also doesn't go through and remove products that are either no longer made or obsolete or
Wow.
whatnot. So there's, it's cumbersome, for lack of a better way to say it.
And Vicky, correct me if I'm wrong, like we would do some efficacy trials of like burnout. I mean, remind me some of the names, but some of these non-selective products where we would apply them at different intervals and then overseed aggressively, trying to essentially knock everything back and encourage desirable species. But like it got to the point where it was so frustrating because we just weren't seeing um, any huge differences. So it was very frustrating to do, number one. And number two, it just got to the point where it was like, we're not seeing any products that we can think about here for the turf managers use X, Y, and Z, with the
Right.
exception of Fiesta. And we haven't done anything on the insecticide realm, but like I mean, entomologists have way far from Connecticut. Grub Gone, excellent product. Fiesta, good product. You're going to have some damage. You're going to have some negative influences, but effective. You
Mhm.
got to do reapplications, but effective. So became very frustrating for us to come up with this master list of here's
Right.
the ones we are recommending. These are the ones that are
Yeah.
effective. So whether it was cost or just not existing, it was very frustrating for on our end.
And so Jason mentioned one product, Grub Gone. They can use that. And the way they can use it, it was slipped into the legislation through a budget implementer one year that Grub Gone was okay, but not a Celiprin or not some of the others where you can measure. So that's that. So they can use that right now in the state if they had a grub issue, or if they had history of something, then they could try to do something preemptively to try to correct it. But so when I was hired, so in 2010, we have a minor league ball field here in Connecticut that a couple neighboring school districts, one in particular, shipped their basically rented, for lack of a better way to say it. So that was a field that had all sorts of, chemical use on it, because it was a privately held field, and yet they used it for municipal on weekend activities and whatnot. And yet you had the ban in place in their towns where their fields were being consumed by grubs and didn't have safe playing surfaces for them to use. So it really is disjointed in terms of some of the activity that we've seen over time with this.
Are you talking about Dodge Stadium?
Yep.
Vic?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, so they bust kids to Dodge Stadium because this one town in particular, North Stonington, the fields were at their high school, junior high school areas were had crub activity.
Completely decimated. New soccer fields installed like 2, 3 years before the ban, just completely decimated.
In your work through extension in Connecticut, do you get a sense that like how do people view this legislation? Is it viewed as a success? Like this has been great? Is it viewed as well, this is okay, but it's not what we thought it was, and there's some trade-offs that maybe we didn't see at the outset? Like, do they wish they could go back in time and redo it? Like, what's the
Well,
viewpoint been?
funny you mentioned that, Jim, because I asked the person that's in charge of the pesticide management division, and we still think that the public perception is they're pretty much not aware in terms of where the bans are in play. Seriously, in terms of some public perception, I would say overall the public perception is that obviously pesticides are unsafe and bad in general, so that carries that fear, for lack of to
Right.
say, that you get with a good number of the residents, but they still don't really are not aware, or let's say they don't care about the whole process with notification, whatever else. So, um, uh, this person that I mentioned that's in charge of this division has been involved with our school IPM workshop since 2010. And she said, certainly that was a hot and heavy way back when in terms of them pushing for the ban for the K-8 schools. And they try I want to say every other year, every 3 years, they try to extend that to the municipal budget, so that it would be a ban statewide for all public properties. And it gets fought and voted down, but I just don't necessarily think they really understand it.
Yeah, I mean, and I got to think that, that's what's dangerous about these is even if you had all new legislators in, it's hard to go backwards, right?
Hmm.
To put something
Yeah.
forward to bring pesticide use back because public opinion wise, it's a pretty tall mountain to climb.
Yeah, and if you think, for example, like in April when school vacation is on, like if so there wouldn't be any school, they could shut down the fields, that might be a time where they could use, for example, a pre-emergent crabgrass control. No, because of this immediate threat to human health, like they just do not allow anything. But they're, in a situation where, is a little different, or like in New York State, if they had a grub problem, they can get their exemption and treat their fields and go back to, managing their fields as pesticide free as possible once they tackle that issue. And yeah, no, they can't do anything here.
Well, Jason, like, has the injury component kind of helped, like, made any leverage on the human health angle for coming in with
No,
treatment, or
no,
is that still largely unheard?
I would say no. I mean, because think of how difficult it is to track injuries in the
Sure.
NFL or even at the collegiate level. Like to have the expertise and the coverage at the number of youth games that is occurring, like the ability to track those numbers is very difficult, I guess, to put it mildly. So that's the biggest challenge. I mean, we've got a USDA grant pending right now where we're going to try to do that. There's a multi-institutional grant across multiple locations to try to do that. But aside from significant funds to be able to do that and do it confidently and comprehensively is a challenge. So it's been difficult to say, hey, and we did it it was one of the questions we asked. But it's again, how often are the turf managers physically on site when, you know, all these games are happening on a weekend, so at the youth level. So
And
that's been the biggest
it's
challenge.
where they would report it. Do they go to the school nurse? Who's taking the information,
Right.
like on a weekend? Or so if they got hurt during the day, during school hours, and then went to a nurse and then it was recorded. But
Yeah, or if your kid gets hurt, I
yeah.
mean, are they going to go to, unless it's severe, you're not going to go to a clinic, that day. You may wait till the next week. So it's just very difficult to try to get good data there.
Hmm.
Sure.
But in terms of, I'm trying to think back to our results. I mean, I think it was like a perception thing, but I can't remember if it was a perceived increase or not, Vicky, with paper.
There were perceived, the perceptions are, since the ban has been in place, that our fields have declined
But
Yeah.
I'm talking
for
about injury.
safety,
I'm talking about in terms of
but
injury
we have
events.
nothing gets reported. I mean,
Yeah.
even, I had on an IPM grant where I had field assessments, and Bill Dest, as the retired emeritus, was going out to 25 fields for 3 years in a row. And I had somebody doing landscape trying to do assess stuff, but we still never had anybody reported where it became significant, where a town would have been, had some liabilities against it that we were aware.
So we got another question here, and it's a good question. Again, I think um the answer might be, I'm gonna let you guys answer. This conversation sometimes when we talk about pesticides and pesticide banning lacks logic and common sense. Um, but the question is, what benefit do you get from banning pesticides from a public school or a public park when potentially a middle or a high school kid is playing golf all summer long at a privately owned country club or practice facility?
Great point. I think the legislators would say they're not rolling around in it, so to speak. They're an older person. And again, I'm not an expert in this area, so it makes it difficult to make comments regarding safety and combined with exposure. That's not my
Fair.
area, but
Nobody on this call is a toxicologist.
No.
exactly. But I think what people would say is the fact that they're not physically going into the ground, rolling around in it, getting knocked down, tackled, sliding, getting back up, like those types of things, versus walking a course. So less contact and then age, I would say, would be the two comments somebody in that
But
space would say.
but
But that's
even for their own personal, they go to school and then they go home and they play around in the backyard, or they do a same thing, same
Right.
concept. It's just the way it was, you know, the way this was developed.
because
Well,
it comes down to two things, right? It comes down to toxicity of whatever's being applied, and the other, to me, is exposure risk, right? So, the data I've looked at from, dislodgeable foliar residue, even with a product like 2,4-D, which has a pretty high solubility, will last like 2 weeks. And again, you're doing laboratory methods to extract that off of a cotton sheet that was laid down at high levels of dew on turf. So, and you're getting, so after 2 weeks, generally it's non-detectable. But
But on the
um,
flip side, just to go back to that, because I mean, you're familiar with some of the work our lab did in collaboration with Travis Canada at NC State. And
yeah,
if you irrigate or you have a rainfall
right,
after the application,
yeah,
the dislodgeable residues almost nothing within
right,
the next day. I mean,
right.
it's easily mitigated.
And the
yeah,
work we did, again, it was any level we extracted was well below EPA recommendations. So it gets into that whole thing of acute versus chronic, right? So, acute's very easy to, does it irritate the eyes or inhalation or burn, whatever. That's easy to assess. The chronic thing, who's going to sign up for that work or who's going to collect that
Good
data?
luck.
So extremely difficult to get good numbers on that. So, yeah. But to me, when you think logically, you're going to apply the most effective product, right, at the lowest AI possible when the students aren't there using the facility over an extended period of time. The exposure risk is gone. So, with all of that aside, in terms of chronic versus acute, like if it's not there, if they're not interacting with it, where's the risk? Is where my head goes in terms of if you're going to play the safest possible or go the safest possible route.
and
Um,
hey, Jason and Vicky, to that point, have you guys seen any haves versus have not situations? Could you mention the one situation where they actually rented out a non-school owned field to have their athletic events? So, is there a situation where you're in a school district with means, with more affluent parents that are renting out a nice facility to have their athletic events in middle school versus a school that maybe doesn't have those resources and they're having to use whatever they've got there at the school? Have you guys seen any of that type of dynamic develop?
You
I don't think so, Vic. You?
Well, I mean, it's definitely, and even on some of our survey work, some of the suburban or wealthier communities, they would be, they might have a better budget. So even for natural grass care, it's improved over some of the, more urban, school district locations. But, we've seen some, yeah, there has definitely been through some of the survey work that we have done that there.
Brandon, I'm sorry, Vic. Go ahead.
No, go ahead. What were you going to ask,
Brandon, I
Brandon?
just want to clarify your question. Are you talking about pesticides, no pesticides, or just in terms of those more affluent towns being able to implement alternative practices better?
No, well, what I
Or
was thinking
both?
was you kind of both, but you were mentioning the one situation where they had the grubs all over the field, so they rented out a privately owned stadium to hold their athletic events. And you could certainly see a situation where a school district with more means, especially at the middle school level, I wouldn't think in the elementary level, because this doesn't apply to high schools, correct? So
It
Correct.
this
can.
it's K-8, or is
K
it?
It K-8, except if it's a junior, senior high school where they're
Yeah.
utilizing the fields, then it extends to the high schools.
Okay,
So
so
you can have some schools that are doing it.
right.
So
So what I was getting at was in a situation where, then it could even be at the high school level in those situations where if you had the means and you wanted a high performance athletic surface to rent out a privately owned place for your practices and games, and then you wouldn't be subject to the ban because that's at the school grounds. And so you still have kids getting exposed conceivably. We've all agreed that that exposure risk is relatively low, but they could be there. Whereas a school that doesn't have those means, they're subject to a less than favorable athletic field condition that could lead to potential more injuries and things like that. It just seems like it sets up a potential inequity that maybe is unintended.
I mean, in terms of data, I mean, we haven't seen anything in terms of injury or anything like that, but without a doubt, the towns that have more capability are maintaining better
more
playing surfaces.
resources
Without a
definitely
doubt.
can maintain fields better. Yeah,
Because
fair.
essentially what happens, Brandon, is, I mean, you can foresee this happening. Like once that ban happened, those where they were able to sub out a pre-emergent crabgrass control or an early post or something like that, or combination, eventually turned to all crabgrass because they're not cultivating, they're not overseeding, they're not fertilizing. So there was no competition. So anything that was there in the seed bank could germinate and flourish. So they went from bad to just absolute,
And there are some school fields that are adjacent to some of our municipal fields in some of these communities, and they'll go use the municipal fields where the
Wow.
fields have been treated because they're better, they have better playing surfaces.
Wow.
So that definitely has been observed, or I definitely have heard that over time for sure. So,
And no push to try to expand this, hopefully,
well, I
like
think, I
make it
mean, they'll try.
well, I'm
They'll
thinking more like
try
mowing restriction and things like that. Like, has there been any push to add on to it or any desire to add on to it?
to the ban.
Yeah,
Uh,
amongst the public, probably.
extend it to municipalities. That's been attempted,
Okay.
and it's failed like 2 or 3 times since I've been here at UConn. It just doesn't get through. But again, it's school ground. Since it's school grounds, that's one of the, so here we talk about, turf care products, but even now they just passed a law, so it'll be effective next year with the neonics. So again, with some of the tree care, that's going to pose some issues on the school grounds where they might have had, and it has since 2010. There was a private school that was treating regularly for Dutch elm, couldn't do anything once the ban hit in those schools, that type of situation. So now the neonic, that'll build on that with some of the schools, but um, you know, it's a restricted use, and if they so you see it slowly eroding product use,
So, tangentially related here, got a question. Are they doing anything other than integrated pest management to help work around the ban? The IPM piece, I think we all understand. Um, sometimes things like this kind of are the mother of invention. I mean, I know one thing, Jason, you've kind of worked on like mechanical weed control techniques a little.
Mhm.
In response to this, do you want to share that?
Yeah, yeah, you can it's basically a method of basically what we've learned through uh, traffic stress. I mean, there's two components of traffic stress. You've got the bruising, tearing of leaf tissue, removal of leaf tissue, and then you got compaction, right? So we know through your research and research we've done, and fortunate to see this because we do a lot of traffic research, is weeds don't withstand the same level of traffic as our desirable species do. So the question became, how can we implement a level of traffic that damages the weeds and not our desirable grasses? And we do that through just differences in plant shape. Our monocots, the grasses can conform to the action of the machine we created, and the broadleaves can't. So by repeatedly doing this, you're removing the photosynthetic tissue of the broadleaf weeds. For it to reproduce, it's got to grow from the carbohydrate storage in the roots, and they'll grow back with 3 to 5 treatments in the spring or in the fall, starting in the fall, 3 to 5 treatments in the spring. We've taken weed pressure 70, 80, 90% cover down to 5 to 15%. And then you can, spread out your frequency of application as you go through that second spring of treatment. So the machine is called a weed bind. So it's a completely new device for weed control. And it was designed for these situations for bands where people have no other options to maintain our desirable species as a predominant plant growing. So that's how it works. So it just became available in March of this year. It's working very nicely. We did the original proof of concept research at UConn. And then we partnered with Ventrac to develop a commercial version of it. And it's worked out really nice because it gives folks an option to control weeds without just letting them dominate a stand.
So if I'm going to kind of regurgitate back what you said to make sure I'm understanding it correctly. Um, Essentially what it's doing, it's a mechanical piece of equipment that you run over the turf. It lays down essentially traffic, and the weeds traffic at a faster rate than the turf, and then that's why that's basically the mechanism for how the weed population is reduced. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yep.
So what are the trade-offs then to turf quality, right? Because we know that like traffic on turf has some negative trade-offs too. If one were to use this to kind of manage let's say a lawn or a sports field or what have you, are they going to hurt their turf quality by using traffic basically as a weed control tool?
You will see some abrasion, but the turf will recover fairly quickly. I've basically ran it the studies year round to basically try to kill grass, and you will see some damage, but the grass recovers, and you'll see the most damage in your highest stress times of the year, like end of July and parts of August.
Like right
But
now?
and that's what, yeah. But fall is why that's when I like to start, because I mean, when you remove it's a space game, right? So you think about the ecology of a turf stand, it's like a forest, right? So like if you is and the ones that are taller, larger, bigger canopies are going to dominate, right? So you think of like a common planting that's super broad morphology, it just wants to shade everything out, right? Well, if you lift that plant up and remove its space, remove its ability to take up space, now you've created space for our desirable grasses to grow.
Mhm.
So starting in the fall, if it's heavily weed infested, you're going to create voids, right? You want to overseed and create opportunities for the grasses to take over. And that's essentially what you're doing. The plants are competing for space, light, nutrients, and water, right? So we're removing their capability of taking up that space so the desirable species can move in. You overseed, it gets that start throughout the fall, and the weed vine isn't reaching deep enough in the canopy to affect the seedlings. And by the time they do reach that zone, they're mature enough to deal with it. So um, it's a space game. You're giving those desirable species an opportunity to dominate the area.
Well, and it
And
sounds to me a little bit like somewhat from the timing component, it's a lot like what we do with phrase mowing and warm season grass. That like we're
Similar.
we're phrase mowing warm season grasses in the summer to try to you can mechanically remove any weeds that may be present, but you're also the big driver is you're affecting the weed seed bank, but you're doing it when the desirable turf can respond and regrow back in,
Right.
make the canopy a little bit tighter.
And that's why I like doing it in the fall, because you're not only removing that plant's ability to compete, but going into winter, that plant is less able to adapt to dormancy. So get it struggling going into dormancy, let it use its resources going into winter. If anything comes up in the spring, and you'll see some regrowth, you hit it again, it makes it very difficult for that weed to continue to compete, moving from spring into summer.
And if I understood you correctly, Jace, the weed bine is applying the abrasive component of traffic, but not the compressive, compactive component. Is that correct?
Right, right. I mean, there's
Gotcha.
rollers on the machine, but that weight is spread out. I think, did we lose? What happened? Oh,
No,
No,
he's
Jason.
putting the
I
code up.
just brought up our GCSA CEUs for our superintendents listening because we're getting close to the end of our hour, so they can have their code there. But you can keep describing the machine, Jason. It's really neat.
Yeah, Brandon. So there's rollers in the back, but it's more for um, maintaining height. And then there's a base blade that's got different diameter discs on them that are notched. So it's counter rotating, so it's lifting that weed material up. And they're kind of in a V form, large diameter to small diameter. So as it comes up to a broadleaf plantain, it's able to lift that plant up, and then a helical brush is coming down, almost like um, helix-shaped blades on a reel mower, and it's able to grab that. So it's either, if it's young, the principles of weed control still apply. So if it's young, it's going to pull it out. If it's
Mm-hmm.
super massive and mature, it may pull a few leaves off and shred leaves. Yeah, the younger the weed, the better. But that's kind of how it works.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting. I mean, and I think like with reduced options and reduced availability, that's where inventions come from. Like I don't know if any of you listened to the USGA Green Section podcast, but during the Wimbledon Championships, they had Neil Stubley from the All England Lawn and Tennis Club on, and he was talking about, they were kind of a pioneer in using phrase mowing for POA control, and now they're combining phrase mowing with steaming and using like high temperature steam after the phrase mow to keep the weed seed bank clean. I thought it was really fascinating.
Hmm.
How long is that actually contacting the soil surface? Any idea?
The phrase mower or the steamer?
The steamer.
I don't know that Neil got into that, or at least I can't remember if he did in that interview that he did with John Petrovsky with the USGA, but it's definitely something I think there's a lot more to be learned. It's really neat.
Yeah.
No, that's awesome.
Well, I think
So
we're getting to the end of our time. Do you have any
I
final
would
thought you wanna
say
share
that
with the group here?
if anything, I would say takeaway for a good number of folks listening is that be vigilant and pay attention to what's ongoing within your community or state with regard to legislation, because this ban has definitely increased labor needs in terms of cost, care, and maintenance associated with athletic field or general school grounds care. People have tried to share equipment, but again, you gotta position yourself. So if you are going to be faced with something, and maybe there's the contingent here thinks it'll never happen to us, it could very well happen. We had some towns that utilized, rented out space, for example, the farms and whatnot, and they would catch some legislation, that little things that would be coming along to play. And even the use of synthetic fields in terms of thi- towns pushing that then as opposed to natural gas fields. I mean, there's all sorts of variables. So just be vigilant. That would be something that I would say is a takeaway message. And Jason's machine is very cool. That would be my second takeaway. And do your record keeping. We have an app that or a tool that we're trying to use here in the state. But bottom line is, whether you're doing it on paper or doing it as a website, record keep so that you can document your needs as a turf care manager. That's critically important.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, I think the need for that is ever present and will only continue to be in place for sure. So let's leave it there. Jason, Vicky, thank you for joining us, and that'll conclude our episode for August. Next month, we're going to change topics, and we'll have John Jeffries from Pinehurst Number 2 join us, and he's going to talk about work he does there at Pinehurst Number 2, and specifically everything that went on last year with the U.S. Open. So until then, we will see you in September. Enjoy the rest of your day.